In the morning, they're a couple of honest-to-goodness vegetable vendors, but in the afternoon, they'd be driving a beat-up car. They'd take on a different identity. When they arrived at their destination, the first thing they do is to take off their clothes, and then they skillfully change into the raincoats they've already prepared. Then they would securely fasten a rope. Then they lay a clean, waterproof sheet on the ground. After all this, they set up their knives and wait for their employer. When the gangster and his boys have finished the job, then it's their home turf. Taein and Chang-bok are on the fringe of the mob. They are responsible for providing the gangsters with places to kill and disposing of corpses. Since Taein grew up mute, he couldn't find a job, so he had to work for Chang-bok. He had to work with Chang-bok in some unspeakable jobs. Even though he was obviously involved in this kind of life-threatening work, he was obviously involved in this kind of business that harmed people's lives and made money. But in Taein's heart, Taein never wanted to admit his guilt. He was just like Chang-bok. He longed for a normal life, but the gap in reality suppressed their desire every moment. That day, under the threat of the boss, they received another assignment. They needed to arrive at an apartment on time, to guard a kidnapped hostage. They thought it would be another gang fight like the old days, but when they carefully opened the door, they were greeted by a child wearing a rabbit mask. Chang-bok thought the boss had made a mistake, but when he called to inquire, he was scolded by the other party. It turned out that this little girl was the one they were dealing with. Only his rich father had been reluctant to pay the ransom. That's why he survived until now. But it was the two Chang-fus who had a bigger headache. They didn't want to be accomplices in hurting the child, but they were afraid to disobey the boss orders. Chang-fuk suggested sending someone to take the kid back for temporary custody. Because he's withdrawn and mute, no one would normally visit his house, though the mute Tae-jin was strongly against it. But after Chang-fu gave him a lecture, he had no choice but to accept this burden. On the way back, the little girl was very quiet. She told Chang-fu her name was Chu-shi. She was her father's least favorite child. As if she knew what she was going through, he replied to the adults' questions carefully all the way. When we got to the entrance of the village, Tae-in switched to a bicycle, and Chu-shi sat behind him. When that pair of strange little hands grabbed onto Tae-in's lapel, he couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. This was the first time since he grew up that he was close to someone other than Hor Blessing. For the first time, I felt the responsibility of caring for a child for a moment. However, it was only for a moment. When she passed by an old granny, a few moments ago, Chu-shi immediately jumped out of the car and called out for help, but the grandmother was blind. She thought she was Tae-in's sister. She only gave Tae-yun a few symbolic warnings, in order to prevent Chu-shi from escaping again. For the rest of the journey, Tae-yun used a rope to tie him to his back. Finally, at nightfall, he brought him back home, but the environment of the house made the little girl feel even more scared. It was like a garbage dump, full of trash, especially the children who came out of the dirty clothes. It made Chu-shi feel even more desperate. His first thought was that she must have been kidnapped by those two bad guys. When Taran went to take a bath, Chu-shi immediately looked for an opportunity to ask the little girl, "Is there a phone here?" And said that, when his father comes to pick him up, he said that, when his father came to pick him up, he would also rescue him from here. But before he could ask any more questions, Tae-yun pushed in the door after taking a shower. He not only turned off the TV, and told Chu-shi to go to bed immediately, and lay down in the doorway. He blocked the only passageway, and the little girl lay silently on his back. She fell into a deep sleep with his arms wrapped around her. This scene made Chu-shi feel a bit lost. She even despaired whether she could escape from these people's clutches. When the sun rose again the next day, seeing the open door, Chu-shi had the idea of escaping again. However, when he saw Tae-yun washing up outside, his short-lived hope was dashed once again. He tried to ask the little girl's name. He tries to ask the little girl's name, and inquire about her relationship with Tae-in. But Manu told him that she was Tae-in's sister. Tae-in at the door was unaware of this. Just as he washes up, he receives another message from Chang-bok. In order to prevent Chu-hei from sneaking out, Tae-yun had to take him with him, this time. But to Tai-yin's and Chang-fus' surprise, the corpse they cleaned up this time was the Black Boss, who sent them a mission a few days ago. The Black Boss who sent them a mission a few days ago. Before, he was still dressed in a suit. He was a high and mighty gang leader. Now he's a prisoner to be slaughtered. What kind of reform are you running for? I called my uncle to clean up the bodies and blood. I sent someone to take off the suit of the boss. In fact, he had been coveting this expensive suit for a long time, but the oppression of the boss in the Gulf and class has kept him humble. He dreamed that one day, he could wear this suit and enjoy himself, and live the normal life of a rich man. Today, Chu-shi, who was outside the door, saw all this. He finally understood the ruthlessness of these people. At first he fantasized that this mute uncle might be a kind man, but his luck was completely shattered today. From this moment on, He no longer dared to run away. When he accompanied the two men to the mountain to bury the body, Chushi volunteered to help them to commit the crime, because he knew, only by catering to them could he hope to survive. But what Chushi didn't know, but his action made Taran feel as if he had been slashed in his conscience. In order to get rid of Chushi as soon as possible, Tae Yoon and Chang Fu took the risk of going to the kidnappers under the Black Boss. But they didn't expect. The kidnapper just dumped the whole thing on them. The kidnapper said he had completed the kidnapping mission. He hadn't been paid yet. Now that the boss is dead, then the ransom demand. Chang Fuk and his men must fulfill the ransom demand. Otherwise, even if the child is returned, they'll still have to pay their share of the ransom. Seeing that they were in such a difficult situation, so the kidnapper gave them an idea. He suggested that they continue to demand ransom from Chu Zi's father. On the other hand, he'll try to contact the traffickers. If Chu Zi's father doesn't want to pay the ransom, then he'll sell him to the traffickers. Now Tae Yoon and his men are in a difficult position. They had to accept the other side's suggestion. When they got home that night, Tae Yoon had Chu Hei write a blackmail letter. Chushi continued to be a good girl. Not only did she raise the ransom to 200 million won, she was kind enough to explain her questions to Manu. Close understanding. Tae Yoon's self-loathing. Tae Yoon's self-loathing. He doesn't even dare to look directly into Chu Zi's innocent eyes, but he still won't know. All this behavior is just Chu Zi's way of pleasing him in order to survive. The next day, Chu Zi's letter was delivered to the kidnapper's brother, and their agreement seemed to go on as promised. For the next few days, everyone was waiting for good news, and that naturally included Chushi, who was terrified. Whenever Tae Yoon came home, she would immediately act like a big sister. She would tutor Manu in reading and writing. He would also fold the clothes in the house neatly, and then work hard to fix the table, waiting for Taein to come home to eat with her. All these changes in the family are because of this kidnapped girl. The more he understood, Taein felt more and more confused. Even in his trance sometimes, he felt that Chu Hei was like family, as if he sensed that Taeyun had let his guard down. That night, Chushi had a second thought about asking for help. He tried to steal Taeyun's cell phone, but he didn't realize he'd woken him up. The toilets in the countryside are particularly eerie. Chushi had to beg Taeyun to stay with him, to make him feel safe. Taeyun kept clapping his hands to show that he was right outside the door. He kept clapping his hands to show that he was right outside the door. This small gesture became a bridge between them. Soon it was the 7th day after Chushi was kidnapped, but the ransom money from his father was not forthcoming. Living here is not a torture, but Taeyun's work was not conducive to the child's development. He still takes Chushi with him when he works, and Chushi seemed to have gotten used to it. Sometimes he would turn the blood from the bodies into flowers. It seems that the goodness in his heart has never been erased. That day, Chang Fu brought them a camera. It was meant to take pictures of Chushi, to blackmail his father, but Chushi took it to take a family photo for them. Chushi even cooperated by taking a blackmail photo of himself. He even put on a sad face. When Chuzi's father saw the photo, finally agreed to pay the ransom, but there was no joy on Taeyun's face. During this period of time with Chushi, he had long gotten used to his existence. Now he suddenly had to send him away. He was still reluctant to give him up. The next day, before the transaction, Chang Fu specially instructed Taran, before 12 noon, if he didn't hear from him, then it means that the deal has failed, or he's been caught. Then he has to implement another plan. He must sell Chushi to the traffickers for cash. Taewon wanted to persuade Chang Bok to refuse this risk, but the amount of money in front of him made him hesitate. It was soon approaching 12 noon. Chang Fuk arrived early to survey the situation. When he realized who he was dealing with, he immediately limped along. Since he had never done this kind of deal before, he was very nervous. When he got the money bag and left in a panic, he stepped on the stairs by accident. He tried to get up and run away, but a very serious head injury. He couldn't stand up anymore. Meanwhile, on the other side, Taeyuan was still waiting anxiously for Chang Fu's call. As time passed by, there was no reply. He could only implement another plan. Chushi is still so well behaved, understanding, so well behaved that Taeyun couldn't bear to hand him over to the traffickers. Taeyun took him to a remote chicken farm on his bicycle. He met the target at the back of the airport. The rooms here are filled with children who have fallen asleep, and Chushi was about to become one of them. The traffickers have prepared a drugged drink for Chushi. After Chushi drank it, the other guy signals for Taran to leave. Taran couldn't look Chushi in the eye. He hesitated for a moment, but chose to leave. Chushi watched him silently from behind. There was fear and despair in his eyes. Perhaps more than anything else, he was disappointed in this man. After returning home, Manu desperately searched for her sister, but all she got in return was Taeyun's silence over and over again. The room that used to be filled with laughter, was now empty and lonely. Cheziok's immaculately cleaned suit on the wall, it stood out to the eyes. These are the clothes he used to take off from the boss. It's also the normal life he once aspired for. Now this suit is like a well in a well. He couldn't help but follow his heart's desire for a normal life. It's like not being able to follow his conscience, to let a child live a life of misery. So he put on the suit, he got on his bike, he decided to save Chu Shi. It wasn't just for the kid, it was also for himself. He went crazy. He pedaled his bike to his destination. Finally, when the children were being transferred, he caught up with the school bus. He ignored the trafficker. He fought with him. After a lot of fighting, he finally managed to push him off the bus. Then he managed to drive the children away from the clutches. He parked his car in the downtown area, with the intention of taking Chu Shi away. Trish was particularly resistant to his arrival. When Tae-yoon left her at the trafficker's place, she lost all trust in this man. Taran still brought her home, but this time he didn't lock the door. Seeing a chance to escape, Chu Shi didn't hesitate to run towards the field, because he wasn't sure if Tae-yoon would sell him somewhere else. After running through the night, after a long time Chu Shi finally met an old man, riding a bicycle on a country road. Without thinking, he asked for help. However, when he saw the man's face full of bad intentions, Chu Shi realized that something was wrong. He struggled to break away from the other man. He ran towards the field again. At the same time, Tae-yoon came after him, looking for him. When he found Chu Shi covered in wounds, his first thought was not to blame. He was filled with heartache. Chu Shi is still so good at reading people's mind. He didn't choose to run away. He took Tae-yoon's hand and went home with him. But what they both didn't know is, the old man on the bicycle was indeed a retired police officer. He quickly called the police on duty. He started looking for the girl. When the policewoman followed the clues and found Tae-yoon's house, but found him clapping his hands strangely in front of the toilet door, his behavior made the police feel something was wrong, so they insisted on opening the toilet door, in order to prevent him from discovering his kidnapping. He instantly lost his mind and fought with him. While Chu Hae calmed down Manu, while secretly observing the situation, he doesn't dare to help the police, because he wasn't sure if a policewoman could beat Taran. Apparently, he was right to be worried. During the fight, Tae-yoon knocked over a heavy object and knocked out the policewoman. This scene also made a few people in the audience tremble with fear. But what Taran never expected was, Chu Shi appeared to be unusually calm at this moment. He not only took the initiative to pick up the shovel, he not only took the initiative to pick up a shovel and dig a hole, but also helped Tae-yoon to bury the policewoman. Taran, after today's fear, he blames Chu Shi more than anything else. Although he is a mute and mentally retarded, but now he understands. He can't let Chu Shi suffer anymore. This Taran didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, he planned to send Chu Shi back. He helped Chu Shi organize his clothes and school supplies. Then he rushed towards the school with the two of them speechless. But Taran didn't know. As soon as the two of them left, the kidnappers drove their car to his house, and Moonju, who was alone in the house, became their target this time. When the kidnappers wanted to take Moonju away, but the policewoman who was buried last night suddenly came back to life. Seeing that she was a police officer in uniform, the two kidnappers could only put down Moonju. They chose to run away. Meanwhile, on the other side, Tae-yoon brought Chu Hae to his school. Chu Shi happily introduced him to the environment and his class. It's as if Tae-yoon is his own brother. But when he saw his teacher trying to get away from Tae-yoon's hand, Tae-yoon was a bit reluctant to let go. He's like a little animal full of ignorance. It was Chu Zi's appearance. It's Chu Zi's appearance that made him realize what a normal life should be like. However, the tighter he clenches his hand, the more Chu Shi resisted him. And in the end, he even shook off Tae-yoon's hand in anger. He ran towards his teacher, leaving behind only a bewildered and lost Taran standing in the same place. Seeing his long-lost student suddenly appear in front of him, the teacher was so excited that she cried so hard that she couldn't speak properly. Curious, she asked Chu Shi who the man was who sent her here. However, Chu Zi's answer was like an instant oxygen drain on Taran. Tae-yoon left the school as if she was running away. She didn't dare to stay. She doesn't have the right to stay. She was like a puppy living here casually. She has no idea about the world, just a humble existence. Maybe she had hopes for a better, more dignified life. And that suit may have been the only thing he ever dreamed of when he imagined himself as a dog-turned-man. But his final escape was so fearful, so scared, and that was the moment he finally realized that he wasn't human after all, even though he could wear that suit, which represented decency. But underneath that suit, he was still a dog's humble body. He's not recognized. He could never live with a face, though the people chasing after him have disappeared. But that fear will follow him for the rest of his life. It will never go away. He took off the suit that didn't belong to him. He stepped on the dirty mud puddle. He walked towards his own world. But where is his home now? The moment he was identified by Chu Shi, his only crumbling house was gone. The movie is like a horrible fairy tale. There's no context for the characters. There's no end to the story. But it's a movie that turns your heart inside out. You want to scream and curse, but there's no one to shout at. You want to cry at the top of your lungs, but you don't think you deserve it. Many people will wonder, how could Chushi be so calm? Calmly walking with strangers. Calmly watching the triads kill. Calmly helping Chang Bok and Tae-yoon dispose of the bodies. In the end, he even helped Tae-yoon bury the policewoman. He's far beyond the mental capacity of an 11-year-old. He's much more than an 11-year-old's mental ability. When the end came, when that look in her eyes at the end of the scene, when she looks away from her parents and bows, you realize that this little girl's heart has already died in his development. He's just using a kind of acting skill that has already seen through people's heart. He's playing his own role. That's just like the beginning. The meaning of that rabbit mask is so scary, but how heartbreaking. I think his feelings for Taeyeon are all about his ruthlessness. It's much more than the gangster in the drama. A girl so precocious that her heart died. A boy who's as clueless as an animal. Two souls who want to live normally, but they're always careful. The world is so contradictory that it divides people. One doesn't know who to blame, nor do they know how to find this heartbreaking pain. It makes you want to cry.